one and only specialist for the language of Caucasian Albania. What is the best thing we should work on?
This was for purpose?
German-speaking countries, to the United States, even to Israel. So everything is covered.
Disseminating the awareness of Armenia and Artsakh through Europe and international communities. Welcome to our program. Today our guest is very famous Austrian Armenologist Jasmine Dum-Tragut.
Jasmine Dum-Tragut is considered one of the most active and creative Armenologists outside Armenia, known especially for her interdisciplinary projects, her inclusive methodology, and her manifold collaborations with Armenian academic, church, and governmental institutions. She is University Associated Professor of Armenian Studies and Linguistics, directs the University of Salzburg Center for the Study of the Christian East and its Armenian Studies Division.
Thank you for accepting our invitation and being our honored guest.
Hello, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Today we will speak mostly about Caucasian Albania Handbook, which was published in 2023, and it was really very significant book, which include approximately 16 articles about Caucasian Albania, and mostly it presents set of knowledge. We focus on Caucasian Albania and focuses on architecture, heritage, written heritage, language, religion.
Well, that's an interesting story. It was in 2020, so directly after the war. I founded a committee for the protection of the Artsakh cultural heritage in Austria, because I was already a member of the Western Diocese Cultural Heritage Committee. So they said, okay, just found one in German-speaking countries, and I said, okay, I will found one in Austria together with some of my colleagues and with our dear Bishop Tiran. And so we were discussing, first of all, what could we do for preserving, protecting the Armenian cultural heritage in Artsakh after the war. So one of my colleagues there is very famous Caucasorologist Jos Gippert, who is one of the, I think he's even the one and only specialist for the language of Caucasian Albania. And we were just discussing and he said, you know, one thing which is of utmost urgency is a real good book on Caucasian Albania, because there are such a lot of stories about, we don't know what is happening there. Of course, from the Azerbaijani part, there are a lot of fake histories, of invented things also, how they interpret the history and the literature of Caucasian or about Caucasian Albania. So Jost and me, we said, okay, let's think about publishing a book on Caucasian Albania. And I said, okay, let's do it, but we have to find specialists, which is not that easy, no? So we invited some of our colleagues of well-known specialists on Zoom, because this was also time of Corona.
Yes.
So we could only meet via Zoom, and so we had several sessions on Zoom with various international scholars to talk about the topic of Caucasian Albania, various topics such like religion, language, architecture, mainly architecture, and other things. And then we just fixed a team of scholars, and we sat together and we all together developed the idea of this book.
Yeah,
so, for example, the people who are working on architecture, they ask us, what do you think we should work on? What is the best thing we should work on? Some of the people working on architecture said, no, I'm well in architecture, but I've actually never been there, so I cannot talk about it, I cannot write about it, because I've never seen it with my own eyes, which is very important, no? And so we just decided among us who will write about what is important, and so we really were a group of specialists sitting together from time to time, and even after having written the first draft of our of our articles. All these articles were spread among us, among the authors, and everybody said what we should add or what is important or what we can use for the other articles, or like cross-references, which is very important. And so that's how the book came into being, and it was just a very short time. It was just within, I think, 1.5 years, the whole process, including editing, which was very difficult because of the many languages we have, and of course because of the material we used.
As you mentioned about contributors, I also have a question about this, because what is interesting for me, that most of the experts are not Armenians. Yes. So this was for purpose, yes, or how you choose, what kind of criteria you implement in order to choose contributors?
Yes. So for us it was of utmost importance that most of the authors should be non-Armenians. Because why? Because it was from my own experience in Austria, working for cultural heritage, working for Artsakh also, that usually our politicians, our people, listen more to non-Armenians than to Armenians, because they said, of course it's your country, because it's your people, so of course you have this emotional relation, but other people who are not of Armenian origin might be more neutral, might be not as much emotional. How did we choose the people? Just by looking at the literature, just by giving call. We gave a kind of call who had published something about Caucasian Albania, who had worked about Caucasian Albania. And there are not so many really scholars having worked on Caucasian Albania or on the sources about Caucasian Albania. So that's how we gathered these people, really starting from German-speaking countries to the United States, even to Israel. So everything is covered, whole Europe, US, as I said, Middle Eastern countries, and of course we also have contributions from Armenia, of course. Yes.
Really very interesting articles and very interesting topics about Caucasian Albania. And what is important, that as you mentioned in your speech, actually after the Artsakh 44-day war, Azerbaijan uses Caucasian Albania thesis for its propaganda, for appropriating Armenian heritage and erasing Armenian identity from the monuments. So this is also like, can we consider that these kind of publications can be a tool in order to counter Azerbaijani's policies? And also, what do you think in the means of also disseminating the awareness of Armenia and Artsakh through Europe and international community?
I think it's an important tool, first of all, because it is a handbook, which means, what does handbook mean? We have several articles, as you said, we have about history. First we start with the sources. What kind of sources do we have? In foreign sources like Greek, Roman, to Arabic, to Persian, what do we have what about the language? What do we know about the language? No? What do we know about the people themselves? What do we know about their church? What do we know about their art, their architecture? So each article you can take and read as a whole complex. So, for example, if someone is interested just in architecture, just take out this part of architecture and it's okay, because there's everything inside. And on the other hand, of course, we have looked at the state of art. So what is the last results of research? What do we have, of course? And of course, we try to have it as neutral as possible, because we are scientists and we have to give facts. And that's the most important. Scientists have to give facts. Of course, we can say, okay, this is our opinion, this is not our opinion. But first of all, we give the facts. And I think that's the most important part, to give facts, and to give these facts in a language which is not only for scientists. And of course in English. So it's a very broad audience we have, a very broad public we have. And I think the book is very well, I think we have a lot of audience already, and a lot of people says it's very basic information we give, also because there's a lot of information which is misunderstood, or which is not given properly. Of course, not even only in Azerbaijan. Of course, they try to make the information, to use the information in their direction, and of course, they change the information. But also in other countries, people do not know. So I had a lot of course, for example, with people specialized in Byzantine history, said, no, this is more like, Byzantine style state, and so a lot of various things are going on, but I think it's very important to give these facts, first of all.
Sure. And you're not only the co-editor of the book, but you also have 2 articles in the book, one with co-authored Joost Giepert and from Hamburg University, and the second one is separate, very interesting article. I read it, I had the pleasure to read it, and it's about the Caucasian Albania Church, development of the church from 4th to 8th centuries, and you give very important insight of, is it a separate entity, the church, or it's a part of the Armenian church, and what's your result, what's your insights about?
Yeah, first of all, it's of course very difficult to speak about the churches and early Christianity in the whole region, because as we know, the whole region was very early Christianized, of course, and for a very long period, let's say until the invasion of the Arabs, this whole region was somehow connected very closely to each other, which means when I talk about the region, so I talk about what we have now, Armenia, Georgia, which was at that time Iberia, and of course the part of Artsakh and Albania, Caucasian Albania. So if you look at the history, of course a lot of the church history they have in common. In general, they share the histories in common for both of all. And of course the early Christian history depends upon who organized it, who was the head of the region. So if we think about the early Christianization of this part of the Southern Caucasus, which I call the most eastward Armenian settlements, which I said Artsakh and also Utik. No? So we know that the church there was very strong, and we know also that in later medieval parts it played an immense role for the Armenian church here in the east. At that time when Cilicia was the most important kingdom for the Armenians, but the church, and especially the disputed Catholicosate, which was still called the Catholicosate of Albania, but it was the Catholicosate of an Armenian church in Gandzasar, of course, played an immense role for the whole region. But to come back, what I did is I tried to look at the sources, whatever sources we have about the churches in the Armenian tradition, in the Greek tradition, and of course also in the Syriac tradition, and about the first ecumenical councils also, who took part in the councils. Do we have any information about, let's say, Caucasian Albanian bishops who participated at these world councils like Ephesus, Nicaea, Chalcedon, and so on, and later on, and how was the cooperation between, let's say, the Albanian Christians, the Georgian Christians, and the Armenian Christians? And we see very often that it depended, of course, upon their leaders, upon the leadership. So, but in general, they were very close to each other, especially in dogmatics, because this is one of the first questions I gave, is what kind of dogmatics, what kind of Christology did they have? So we know that the Oriental churches, to which the Armenian church belonged, was from the beginning Miaphysite, like the Assyrian church, the Syriac church, I'm sorry. And the Georgian in the beginning as well, and the Caucasian Albanian in the beginning as well. We know that from history the Georgians then left. They became like the Byzantines, Deaphysite. But that was just a little bit later, so 7th, 8th century, it really got fixed. And for the Caucasian Albanians, usually what we saw from the sources and what Joost Giepert even said from the written sources we have, so the manuscripts we have, that there are no differences in liturgy, and there were no differences perhaps also in dogmatics, because for them the most important was, let's say, until the 7th, 8th century, to confront themselves with the so-called Nestorians. So the Assyrian church, the Syriac church of the East, because they had problems, dogmatic problems, but not so much against the Byzantines. So this is quite important and quite interesting, but we can see that surely until the 7th century they were very close to each other, and after that, especially after the invasion of the Arabs, partly, so the real Caucasian Albania part, which is very much to the north of Artsakh, no, it has in general nothing to do with Artsakh, so to say, was later on also Muslimized, Islamized, and partly the Christians belonging to this state of Caucasian Albania, a part of them, they just moved to the Georgian church, a part of them became Muslims, a part of them, especially those who lived more in the southern part, they were much more Armenized, so they became members of the Armenian church. But in the whole region, it seems it was much more the Armenian church who was had the leadership over the Christian people living there. And we know it because we know it from the various councils, Armenian church councils, and even from the Georgian literature. So it's not just that we say, okay, the Armenian were writing about it. It was also, we find it in the Georgian documents, in the Byzantine documents, and of course we find it in Syriac documents, which is quite important.
I know that you researched the history and written sources on Caucasian Albania, and you know a lot of languages. One question about the architecture, maybe it's a little bit far from your academic interest, but are there architecturally differences between these churches? Because now, you know, Azerbaijan says that, this was vandalized by Armenians, they added inscriptions, they added crosses, so these are all Caucasian Albanian churches. But do we have in written sources like architectural differences depicted in them?
This was one of the main questions we had to our specialists, and as a matter of fact we can say nothing for early churches. So it seems there were no major differences for the early churches, even not being a specialist in architecture. If you look, for example, at Armenian churches before the Arab invasion and the Georgian churches before the Arab invasions, there are many similarities, just what they used for building. So the same you could say for the Caucasian churches. They were the same way of building churches. No, perhaps they used other material, but in general they looked quite the same, and even you don't have differences in the liturgical composition of the church. So later on, as some of the experts say, we have some churches which are really in Caucasian Albania, which means the north of Azerbaijan, also to go into the part of Dagestan. These churches are somehow different, but these churches are not as old because they were later on built, or they were later on formed into something which is somehow overcome Byzantine, Georgian. You don't know, because it seems also that, which was very popular, that it depends upon the builders, no? Because very often the kings or bishops who had churches built, they brought masters from outside. Yes. As we know, no? Yes. So, as we know, let's look at the northern part of Armenia, where you have these Georgian-like churches, where we know, of course, these were Armenian Georgian families who brought their architects but from Georgia, and that's why they look like Georgian, or they look like this, but in general they are Armenian churches. So the same might have happened there, but we do not know, because we do not have any church inscriptions, and we do not have any facts that one can prove that this is an Armenian church. So on the opposite, we have a lot of facts to prove that these are Armenian churches, because we have the sources, which means sources, written sources. I'm not so much referring to chronicles, because chronicles, you always have to be cautious about what is written in chronicles. But the most important information we have from the colophons of manuscripts, and of course the manuscripts themselves. So if you have a lot of manuscripts from early settlements, or from monasteries in Artsakh, for example, this proves that this has been an Armenian church, this has been an Armenian monastery. Yes. How could it be? No? Yeah. And especially in the colophons, you have a lot of information. No? So I think that's of utmost importance, and of course whatever you have in hagiographic literature, which means literature about saints, because we have these stories about Saint Yerisha and Saint Tade in this region. So, but they came later. They were just more, let's say, later, perhaps after the 7th century even. Given or invented by people to say, because very often such stories were used to show, okay, we have our own Christian history, we have our own sources. So we do even not know about, so we cannot prove these stories, for example, about Yerisha or this.
Yeah, I see. So this very important issue seems uncovered in Armenian studies by international experts and by Armenian experts as well. So what do you think, what's the reason why it is actually, it gained a lot of interest only after war, or it is because of maybe the severe effects? What's the reason of that?
I think first of all we have to go back to Soviet time. Because, as you know, during Soviet time it was very difficult for foreigners to enter such places and really to study. I mean, just to go there and to take pictures, okay, not a problem. But to be frank, how many of us have ever been to the places of Caucasian Albania? After war, especially after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, after First Karabakh, of course nobody of us could go. I mean, not even me, being Austrian, but being on the list of the red list, persona non grata of Azerbaijan. So, of course, we could not go. So we have to rely on a few people who had worked there and to give us the information or give us older photographs and new photographs. So, for example, it's just Jos Kippert who has been there very often, no? Because he had to check the few inscriptions we have, and he was trying to find something in churches or some of the architects. But in general, it's very difficult because the whole region is difficult. First of all, really to understand the history of the whole region, you need to know a lot of languages. Yes, as you do. I do not know all these languages. Of course, I do not know Georgian at all. I can just read it, but I cannot understand it. But I mean, you should know classical Armenian, you should know classical Georgian, you should know other Caucasian languages, you should know Persian, you should know Arabic. Who knows? So people have to cooperate, and this is just the way we can do it now, because a few years ago nobody was thinking about that kind of cooperation. And of course for us it was very important also to have these archaeologist from Israel, because she was working on the monasteries there in Georgia, Georgian or even Caucasian monasteries in Israel, in Palestine, which is quite interesting, because there we have some interesting facts, no? Yeah.
It's very interesting, and I know I think that Caucasian Albania and a lot of topics on Caucasian Albania, as we mentioned, written heritage, culture, art, religion, etc. All these topics are very important for. In general, for science to be researched and introduced, and I think that maybe you will continue your publications on this topic, because it's really very important, and we are very thankful for your work that you do. And the last question I want to ask in Armenian, because I know that you speak Armenian very well. So, Professor Jasmine, այն գաղտնիքը, որ դուք 30 տարի է ուսումնասիրում եք Հայաստանի պատմությունը, մշակույթը, նվիրված ու այսպես դարձել եք ձեր հարցազրույցներից մեկում նշել եք, որ կես հայ, կես ավստրիացի, որն է այդ գաղտնիքը, եւ իհարկե շնորհակալություն դրա համար։
Սիրով Հայկի, ուրեմն ոնց ասեմ, ես ոչ 30-35 տարի է, արդեն ինչը Հայաստանում եմ, գնում եմ գալիս, 2 տարի այսեր էի ապրում, բանապայց սովետի ժամանակներ, այսեր եմ սովորել, ավարտել եմ պետական համալսարան, բայց գնում եմ գալիս, գաղտնիքը ինչ է, իրականում ես ոնց ասեմ, կեսը հայ, կեսը ավստրիացի, ինչը իհարկե ճիշտ չի, բայց ես միշտ ասում եմ բանը սրտով հայ, գլխով ավստրիացի։ Դա երևի գաղտնիք է, եթե հակառակ լինի ավելի դժվար կլինի գիտությունը։
Thank you very much, Professor Jasmine, and thank you everyone for being us today. We had pleasure to have honored guest Jasmine Dum-Tragut from Austria, the University of Salzburg.